How's everybody doing tonight? This is Robert Jackson. I am the founder of N.U.V.I.S.I.O.N Ministries, some ministry that I started way back when. It's been several years ago, and just want to do something different tonight and make this video podcast. And tonight I want to have some scholastic conversations with a sister who has some amazing credentials. And so, here in a few moments, I'm going to introduce Minister Deja Wilson MDiv. And I just want to talk to her about her story of her beginnings and how she has just finished her MDiv degree. And I'll let her tell you where she got it from. So, I'm going to bring her to the stage now.
Hey, hey,
Sister
hey.
Deja, I appreciate you joining us tonight and having this conversation. If you would tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll go into the deep questions.
Well, first off, thank you for having me. I'm always honored, and this is definitely a privilege, so thank you. I am Deja Wilson from the great state of Michigan, but currently I live in New Jersey. I have a few degrees. This is my third degree, a second master's degree. I have a Master of Public Health degree from Wayne State University. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Michigan, and I just recently graduated on May 18th from Princeton Theological Seminary.
Ooh, an Ivy League woman. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. Man, when I was looking through her credentials earlier, I was like, whoa, 3.9. Man, that's almost perfect, man. Yeah, my grade point average was not that high when I was in seminary. So I'm like, man,
this has got the best of me because I was
honest.
human for 4.0. I wanted my 4.0.
So Sister Deja, if you would, the reason why I wanted to hear your story is because when I saw when I first got introduced, believe it or not, to your Facebook profile, I went on it and I looked and I'm like, okay, how did this sister get involved with this particular work that's being done right now? I'm like, let me learn more about her background. So, if you would, can you tell us a little bit about how you grew up religiously and how you went from um, um, humble beginnings, I guess you could say, in being a little girl in church to now you're a Ivy League scholar.
Yeah, so I was raised by a single, strong-willed, amazing Black woman. But my mother had me when she was young, and so I had a village that helped to raise me. And so if I wasn't with my mom, I was either with my grandfather, my aunt, or my grandmother, all of which they are all Church of Christ. My aunt was the choir director. She was the nursery leader. She was head of the kitchen ministry. She did it all. And then my grandmother was a Sunday school teacher. So I didn't have a choice, especially if I was with them. I was at church Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday was Junior Achievers when I was growing up. I was at church all the time. And so born and raised through it. But when I went to college, when I went to undergrad, I was introduced to a Christian organization called InterVarsity, and it was an interdenominational faith Christian organization. And we went to a conference maybe my sophomore year. It was a Black Campus Ministries iteration of InterVarsity. And there were about 500 young people who were around my age. We gathered in Ohio for the conference. And we were from all various backgrounds and denominations. And that was my first experience with women preaching and women teaching. And for me, that challenged my theology in a really beautiful and profound way, because it led me to question a lot of the things that I was taught that women couldn't do, that people couldn't do, and the ways in which I could express my praise to God and my worship to God. And so that question for me, or those questings, ultimately led me to doing my own research. I believe that the beginning of faith, it starts with you questioning. Even though I grew up within my faith tradition and context being told not to question, I believe wholeheartedly, like, God is big enough to handle all of our questions, and God wants to hear our questions. And so those questions opened up a new world for me, which provided a lot of revelation. And ultimately, you know, long story short, led me to interacting with a variety of different people who have MDivs, some of whom I went to undergrad with, some of whom I met a little later on, some of whom were in the Church of Christ, who had come out of the Church of Christ. And I was able to be in conversation with, which ultimately led me to finding myself at Princeton and getting an MDiv. So that's the long story short version of it. But that's how I wound up where I am today.
That's awesome. So can you tell us a little bit more of what you focused on while you were working on your MDiv?
Sure. So, well, I focus on a lot of things. So I have 2 concentrations, Black church studies and theology, women, and gender. But I also had interest in intersecting fashion theory with theology. I have an interest in womanist theology, as well as public health, being able to intersect public health with theology. And so over the course of 3 years, through independent studies projects that I did while I was in school, certain classes, final papers, I was able to explore all of those different avenues. So I have a variety of interests. And I am grateful and thankful that I've been at a place like Princeton that has really allowed for me to be able to explore all of them. So yeah, it's not just one thing, it's multiple things with me. It's a little bit of everything.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Who were some of the scholars that you I guess clung to as mentors while you were in seminary? I know you shared a little bit earlier behind the scenes. So if you would just tell the audience some of the scholars that have had an influence, or even if, well, I still say they're scholars because they have books, but who were some of your influences? Some of the people that became mentors and helped you to deconstruct the things that you had heard, you know, growing up in the Church of Christ, of not being able to do certain things in ministry because of your gender.
Yeah. So deconstruction work for me began well before I attended seminary. So one of my greatest mentors and sheroes was my grandmother. Just being able, even though she was a part of the Church of Christ and she fell in line with the theology, she challenged it as well. And so it was her first and foremost. But then after that, being in seminary, Dr. David Lattimore, who is the director of the Black Church Studies Department, has been like a mentor father figure here for me as I have journeyed throughout seminary. He actually came the exact same year that I did. And so we've kind of been on this journey together. But he's a brilliant scholar. I believe he has his bachelor's degree from Harvard. He has his MDiv, his DMin, and his PhD. He did his DMin and his PhD together, all from Duke. Brilliant man. But along the way, I also have been able to meet some other brilliant people as well, one of whom is Dr. Judy Frenchess Williams. I admired her from afar prior to coming to seminary. And I remember watching her on OTOG. And one of my prayers upon entering seminary, I knew all of these men who were in ministry, but I really felt like God was saying that wherever it was that God was going to take me next, I needed a female mentor to be able to journey alongside me. And so it was not intentional for me to try to go to Alfred Street. I was kind of afraid, if I'm honest, to apply to be an intern a couple of years ago, my first time being an intern at Alfred Street. But at the end of that summer, I think it was the summer of 2022, I wound up asking Dr. Judy if she had any mentees and if she wouldn't mind being my mentor. And she was elated and happy about it. And so her and I have been meeting on a consistent basis. And she's just been a woman who does not come from the Baptist faith tradition. I believe she initially grew up Presbyterian, and she has a different and unique type of presence and style to her. But she's just extremely humble, brilliant woman. And she has one of the most sincere and pure spirits. And I just admire her so much to be so brilliant and still remain so humble and also be approachable, people can touch her, people can reach out and talk to her. She's not too busy to be able to meet with people. And that is something I truly desire and aspire within my own walk and journey. I always want to be accessible to people. And so she has been somebody that has been a dynamic person to just walk alongside and be able to ask questions of and talk with and chat with. And she gives me the real about being a woman in ministry and the difficulties that she's had to traverse. But being able to see her, one of my other mentors, Teresa Timms, who works for Princeton University, she talks about possibility models. And so being able to look at somebody and not envy them, but be able to say, hey, if they did it, I can do it as well. So Dr. Judy's a possibility model for me and just my trajectory of what I want to do. She's bivocational, so she works in the church, but she also teaches in the academy. And that's something that I aspire and desire in my life. So her, and then Pastor Wesley, Dr. Wesley, from afar and up close. I admire him as well. Prior to coming to seminary, he is one of my homiletical heroes. I aspire to be a dynamic preacher like him one day. So all of those individuals have had a hand in me being the woman, the theologian, the scholar that I am today.
Man, that is awesome right there, because I was introduced to Dr. Howard John Wesley several years ago, actually from one of my preacher friends. He is a homiletician at heart. I mean, he loves the craft, and he shared with our group. He said, "Man, y'all got to hear this brother right here. You got to hear this series that he's preaching right now." And I think it was what was it? Man, I forgot which series it was. It was the one that got him into a lot of trouble, and I think it was "Can We Kick It" was one of them. One of the Bible study series, and then there was
Can we push
another.
It?
Can we push it? That's it.
Yes.
That's it. And I remember listening to that. I was like, man, I like this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like it. And look, you were talking just a few moments ago about, not being jealous and everything. I mean, you're over there with some true scholars at Alfred Street. I mean, you get to sit with them firsthand, from the ministry side and from the theological side, and that's awesome. I believe, my wife and I have, like I told you earlier, we have a passion for making sure that women and young women's voices are not silenced, and like we were telling you earlier about our sister Brittany Pascal, um, you know, being there for her start in ministry, and helping her to, I guess you could say, to start finding her voice, coming up out of the Black churches of Christ and everything, and then learning about you today, and sitting back and watching and admiring Dr. Irie Lynn session over the years, and learning more about her story, and being introduced, and going to seminary, being introduced to the old heads, Dr. Howard Thurman, and then hearing about Dr. James Cone,
Mhm.
and then being introduced to them, and then finding out, oh man, there's another type of theology over here called Womanist, and then getting involved in reading Womanist scholars, and falling in love with works from Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas. She's right behind me in my library here, and man, and just seeing a different perspective of some of the harmful things that I said and may I said it maybe and even practice. I'll put it like that. Let's just be honest about it. And the harmful things that I've done in the sermons that I've preached and the classes that I've taught over the years, being a young Black minister in the Churches of Christ, and having Black women who have theological training, writing books and being mentors to me through their books, saying, "Hey, brother, you might need to rethink this. Your your way of looking at things may not be your way of looking at things. This may be something that somebody else has told you, and you're just parroting it." And with that being said, how has that been for you with a background in the Churches of Christ, and you're in seminary becoming this scholar, um, the intellect that you are? How has it been navigating those conversations with those who did not support you like your grandmother?
I think it's been interesting. I offer a lot of grace because I've been there before. And I recognize a lot of people are just reiterating the things that they've been taught, that they heard. And so I am always willing to engage and have difficult conversations with people so long as people are open-minded. So long as people are willing to actually engage in dialogue. I have definitely had a lot of people over the last 3 years who have told me I'm going to hell. I done been sent a lot of nasty messages from some people who claim to be God's children, but I don't mind engaging and having the conversation. I also don't belittle, berate, or condemn individuals who have kind of condemned me for this walk in this journey, because I recognize where they are, because I've been there. And it takes some growth, and it takes some learning, it takes some questioning, it takes some exposure. And the reality is, having your theology rocked or challenged is difficult. And the first thing that most people will do is become defensive. And so I offer so much grace for that. I manage my tone of voice. I manage how I engage and how I have conversations, and always try to be a respectful individual, so that it does create a safe enough space for people to be able to let their guards down and be able to actually engage in conversation. And I think that's the way that I've just been able to overcome it. It hasn't always worked. There have definitely been a few people where that's not the case. And, we just agree to disagree respectfully and get out of each other's hair. But yeah, I just recognize it comes with the territory. When you're taught one particular patriarchal hegemonic theology, it makes sense why you see me walking this path and you automatically think, oh, she's in the wrong. This is not what we were taught. This is also not what you've seen. And so the first thing, like I said, is to become defensive, and I extend grace, and I'm willing to engage in the conversations with individuals so long as they're willing to have an open mind. So that's, for me, that's how I handle and deal with it.
Yeah, I have definitely had those conversations before. Had a preacher come to my house one time, and I told him, I said, I have to commend you. I said, even though I think you're crazy, but I have to commend you because you did come to me face to face like a man, and let me know your grievances with me. And yeah, he basically just told me I was leading my family to hell, and mine was just in support of a congregation, that did not fit the norm, and then especially when different ones found out that we were in support of women in ministry. That's when everything hit the fan then. And so speaking of women in ministry, uh, was there one particular class or text or maybe experience that you had that helped you outside of, you know, the encouragement from your grandmother? Is there anything that helped you to better understand that there was nothing wrong for you to be in ministry just because of uh, how God created you? And I'm
Yeah.
asking this question because I'm pretty sure that there will be someone watching this and it's like, well, you know, why does she think she has the right to not only be a preacher but to be a scholar?
Yeah. So, like I said, I already started the deconstruction work prior to coming to seminary. And so, just having exposure to women who were already in ministry prompted the questions. But coming to seminary, I took an African American Pauline hermeneutics course with Lisa Bowens, Dr. Lisa Bowens, amazing New Testament scholar. She is an amazing woman. But hearing about women like Jarena Lee and Zilpha Elaw and all of these other women who have come well before me, I think Zilpha Elaw and Jarena Lee were both AME, but the struggles that they had to endure and just how they were able to use the Pauline text that were used against them and use it as a means to be able to justify why God called them to preach helped liberate me. And then I was able to have just some sidebar conversations with Dr. Bowens. And even though she didn't grow up in a faith tradition that condemned women in ministry, she still kind of helped me be able to read Paul through a different lens, a different perspective and a different understanding, because me and Paul had beef at one point in time, just because so many people misinterpret and misunderstand Paul's letters and just the way in which he writes. And so being able to sit down with Dr. Bowens and her just being able to tell me how if Paul is condemning women, then there would be an incongruence in scripture, because you have Romans 16, where he lists Junia and all of these different women and the roles that they had and the different ministries essentially that they lived out, which would have been contradictory if they were to remain silent. And so that really helped liberate me. But then I did a book report on a book called The Makings of Biblical Womanhood. I can't remember her name. I think it's Beth Allison Barr. I believe that's her name. But she is another brilliant scholar, but just being able to read her work, and it kind of walks down and deconstructs those Pauline texts, particularly 1 Corinthians 14 and 1 Timothy 2, or 2 Corinthians 14, can't remember which passage it is, and 1 Timothy 2, which is typically used within a lot of denominations and faith traditions to silence women. And so just being able to read their works, Dr. Bowens has a book as well. It's called African American Pauline Hermeneutics, along with the course. But then reading Beth Allison Barr's book as well in conjunction just really helped me better understand and gain a better and different interpretation of Paul's words that helped to liberate me and helped to solidify that, okay, God did call me to this. This was not a mistake. And God called those women years before me. So I know that this is okay, that I can walk this path, and people are just misunderstanding and misinterpreting Paul, and that's on them. And if you're willing to have the conversation with me, we can break down the incongruence with understanding. But yeah. So
That's awesome right there. I was listening to you talking about you know, using the Pauline text, that the text that we have taken over the years to beat women over the head, to tell y'all you got to be quiet, you got to go ask your husband, you're not supposed to speak. I've been in settings to where churches actually had a song and a dismissal prayer, and one of the elders got up and said, yeah, we're now finished with service now. I just want y'all to know. And all it was a sister getting up to show us how to use the AED medical device. I'm like, seriously? I'm like, we're still sitting in the same seats. Uh, nothing has changed other than we sang a song and said a prayer and said amen.
Yeah.
The just I'm gonna say just the ridiculousness that us men folks have taught over the years. Um, when I started paying attention to um, the I'm trying to stay politically correct here, but some of the just off the wall um, concepts that we have adopted over the years, and it's not just the faith tradition that we grew up in. It's across denominations. It's an American Christianity, period. And it's like where did we get this from? And um, anybody that knows me knows that I have a problem with how colonialism has affected and infected the way that we view everything,
Mhm.
including scripture. And for me, that was one of the hardest things to deconstruct. It was hard for me to come to terms that I did not grow up in a black church.
Mhm.
That I grew up in a church that was a part of a denomination, and essentially we were in blackface
Right.
in the way that we taught. Um, and then when I was introduced to prophetic black preaching and hearing the liberating messages from prophetic black preaching, and it's like, where have you been?
Yeah.
Why why have I not known about you? Um, Dr. Jeremiah Wright. I mean, hearing his sermons, and then going on down the line, and hearing um, uh, man, what is it? Dr. Renita Weems, I think, was the sister that I heard preach a sermon at Alfred Street. I mean, it's like, where have y'all been?
Yeah.
How come I hadn't heard y'all? How come I hadn't been introduced to scholastic works from um, um, black theologians, whether they be female or male? I mean, even and dare I say, even our queer theologian friends. Where have y'all's voices been?
Right.
Why was I not introduced to y'all? Um, I know why now.
Yeah.
But it's been a journey, and it's still a journey. I remember my wife and I made a conscious decision that um, we were going to be at a church who had a woman in leadership, and that's how we wound up at the current church that we're at. Our good friend and sister, Ebony Lovely, is she was the campus pastor at the time, um, and we went there, and it was like, man, this is so good. From for At the time we just had one child. I was like, this is so good for Leah to see a black woman in
Yeah.
leadership, and um, that's why we started going there, and that's why we're there to this day. I do what I can to try to make sure that behind the scenes, try to make sure that she's taken care of, because I know how we can get as men folks when it comes to women in ministry. So let me hear your take on, because once we put this out, it's going to go out to the world. So once we put this out, what is your message to not only black women who may be on the fence of getting more training in ministry, or maybe thinking about seminary, maybe thinking about, I mean, maybe even leaving their current denomination and being involved with a denomination that affirms their spot in ministry. What would be your message to the women, and then what do you want young Black girls to hear about the gift that God has put into them, and how they could turn around and do the same thing that you have done?
Yeah. I would say if God called you to it, explore it and do it. And I will also say be mindful of the people when you're questing, when you start having the questions, when you start doing some of the deconstruction work of your theology. Be careful of the people that you have as conversation partners, because I probably wouldn't even have an MPH degree, to be honest with you. I probably would have went straight into an MDiv shortly after undergrad had I not had conversations with certain people, some of whom were my own family members, and I valued their opinion, even though it was something that God was placing on the inside of me. So I think it's important for you to be mindful of the conversation partners that you have. But if God called you to it, if God even dropped a little bit of an inkling inside of you, explore it. I will never forget, I was working in corporate America shortly after graduating from undergrad, and I was looking at public health programs. I was still holding on to a dream that I knew God didn't want me to have any longer, but I also didn't know anything any different. And I will never forget, I knew nothing about an MDiv. I knew nothing about theological education, because I was a part of a faith tradition that didn't uplift theological education outside of that particular denomination. And so I remember sitting at my computer and something downloaded in my spirit and said, look up something dealing with religion. Look up something dealing with theology. And so I started doing some research, and I remember seeing seminaries and divinity schools and all of these different things. And I remember having a conversation with a particular family member, very excited about it. And I'll never forget their response was, you're a woman in the Church of Christ. That degree will be a waste of your time and money. And I completely derailed all of my excitement and me looking at that particular degree. And I wound up getting an MPH. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful for my MPH degree. But nonetheless, I knew in the midst of me pursuing that MPH degree that is not what God wanted in that moment. God wanted for me to pursue an MDiv. God wanted for me to keep exploring that quest that God placed inside of me. And so I would say just be mindful of the conversation partners that you have. And if God put it inside of you, explore it fully and completely, and know that you can do it. And also know that there are women who have paved the way so that you can. So get in contact with some of those women, even if I know for me, there were sheroes that I had from afar. Dr. Judy was a shero of mine that I had marveled at from afar. And if I could go back in time and tell younger Deja something, what I would tell her would be, reach out to her. Like, these are human beings. These are people that you can email. And majority of the women in ministry that I have met, especially when you share your story of, coming from a faith tradition that doesn't believe that women can preach or be in ministry, they're willing to engage in conversation with you. They're willing to go on a Zoom call with you. Someone put me in contact with Dr. Emily Towns when she was still dean at Vanderbilt, and she was willing to have a Zoom call with me. It was 20 minutes, but being able to hear her story as this queer Black woman in ministry in higher education was so impactful. So reach out to those women. If you see women in ministry like myself, people who aren't on a big stage or platform or anything like that, be willing to be bold and courageous enough to go up and ask the questions and be in conversation with them, because you never know what might unfold from that. So yeah, that would be my little bit of wisdom or offering, would just be mindful of your conversation partners. If God put it inside of you, explore it. And yeah, like, I believe wholeheartedly, this is a call. And I believe that it is something to be explored. It is something to be cultivated. It is something to be mined. Reach out to your sheroes. Reach out to the people who have walked this path, because you're walking in their footsteps. They've already blazed the trail for you so that you can walk in their footsteps. But there are people there, even if you don't see it in your current context, even if you don't see it within your current congregation, you can. We have YouTube and so much technology that's accessible to us. Being able to go on Facebook and look at videos, or being able to pull up YouTube or Instagram videos. There's so many women. You've named some of the scholars: Dr. Renita Weems, there's Dr. Will Gaffney, there's Dr. Emily Towns, there's Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, there's Dr. Leslie Callahan, and the list goes on. But these are pioneering women who are willing and ready to have the conversation with you. So that would be my advice. If I were to talk to someone who was younger than me, if I were to talk to younger Deja, or just women who really are questioning, if God placed it inside of you, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to God to explore it. It is a call for a reason. Definitely explore it.
Thank you. I know my 12-year-old would love and she's gonna hear it. She would love to hear your story.
I'll have one more thing too.
Go ahead. Tell us what's on your mind.
You talked a lot about how, men in ministry have often been the ones condemning women, but something that we also have to be mindful of is women can also be perpetrators of patriarchy. And so when you're exploring conversation partners, I think it's also important to recognize that not every woman, being as how majority of our congregations are made up of 75% or more of women, not every woman will be on your side. So not every woman is a safe space. So it's important that you really are in conversation with women who have already walked that journey, or who are in the process of walking that journey, because not every woman will be on your side. Majority of the people that have outwardly condemned me have been women in ministry. Well, not women in ministry, have been women within the church. I had a woman last year, I was preaching somewhere, literally DM'd me and told me I was going to hell. And it hurt, because this is a sister, we went to church together. I knew her. I hugged her many a Sundays, So it's not always men folk, it's women folk as well. So just being mindful of that. But yeah.
Now, I'm glad you're sharing those tidbits of information, because I've definitely heard that too. The women, not being in support, and being bold about telling you that you're going to hell and everything. So I think that the last question, go ahead and get the elephant out of the room here. What is your message to brothers that for those of us, because I grew up wanting to be a preacher at a young age, and I thought for sure that was going to be my thing, and I was going to be this great, in my mind, I was going to be this great preacher in our faith tradition, and I was going to be on the scene as far as spreading the word of God, and I was going to do this and do that, and I had all of these thoughts of everything that I was going to do for the Lord, and that was me. All I've ever known up until seminary has been the faith tradition that I grew up in.
Yeah.
So, for brothers that grew up like me, what is your message to us? For those of us, and I say us because I always want to remember that Robert, like you said earlier about the grace, I always want to remember, Robert, you were there not too long ago. That was you, and you were fighting hard about women preaching. I remember one of our aunts said that she thought that our oldest child, Leah, was going to be a preacher. And I said, I remember it clear as day, sitting in our living room in Pulaski, Tennessee. I remember saying she better sit down somewhere. And that's been in my child's lifetime. That's been in the past 12 years. I mean, I had this strong mindset of women cannot be anything other than a Sunday school teacher. Not looking at the women who were responsible for paving the way for me, you know, in the church that I grew up with, the ones who taught me the memory verses, not looking at the fact of hey, Robert, they're just as important in you learning the Bible as your seminary professors were.
Right.
You know, I heard you say something earlier about, you know, having the privilege to sit down with different scholars and everything, and I told my father that you know, I've had the privilege to sit with scholars who have PhDs in academics, but I've also had the privilege to be able to sit with those who have PhDs in life. Yeah. And you talked about that with your grandmother, and so I have to remember my mother and Vivian Gordon, who taught me in Sunday school.
Yeah.
They were just as important with the memory verses and the other things that they taught me as you know, those scholars that I have met over the years. So what is your message to brothers who are on the fence of maybe whether or not women should be in ministry, or maybe they're trying? What is your message to them? How do we become allies to walk alongside a Deja Wilson, a Brittany Pascal? How do we come along and walk beside you all to make sure that your voices are being heard?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question. I would first challenge brothers to start reading some of the scholars that you mentioned before, some of the female scholars, like Dr. Renita Weems, like Dr. Emily Towns, like Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas, who have written immense scholarship and work just surrounding patriarchy within the church, and just the condemnation that women have experienced when walking through ministry. I think it's very important to start reading those voices of opposition, and having an open mind. I say read before actually getting in a conversation, because the reality is most men that I've had conversations with that haven't done the work of reading are very quick, once again, to be defensive. And so I think being able to have an open mind, being able to sit with a book that challenges you, that challenges your theology, is very, very important. But then once you begin reading some of the work and you're familiarizing yourself with it, and even maybe jot down some questions that you might have, some things that don't necessarily sit with you the right way, or some things that you don't necessarily understand, I think is then important to be in conversation with women like myself, women like Brittany, women like a Dr. Ivory Session. We are willing to have the conversation so long as people come correct with an open mind and are willing to engage in dialogue, not trying to tell me why I'm going to hell, not trying to condemn me for this call that God has placed on my life, not trying to do any of those different things, but really coming with an open mind to hear my experience, but then also hear a different understanding and interpretation when it pertains to scripture. I think that is extremely, extremely important. And then I will also challenge brothers to start listening to some female preachers. Something that I struggled with, even when I was starting this journey of like being a woman that was preaching, I was only listening to male voices, and I was only listening to men who were preaching. And so I wasn't hearing the dynamic stories within sermons that centered women's experiences. So start listening to the Vashtis and the Leslie Callahans and the Dr. Judys and the Dr. Zena Jacques, and the list can go on. There's plenty of women who are in ministry who are out there. So start listening to them. But I think the biggest thing is just being in conversation and in community with them, with us. I'm not separate and apart from it, but being in community and in conversation with us. Pastor Wesley talks a lot about the passage of scripture dealing with the Roman centurion after Jesus has been crucified on the cross, and he makes a statement of, surely this was the Son of God. And he talks about how when the Roman centurion was able to get close and was able to see the suffering and was able to see and walk alongside, even for a small moment, this Roman centurion was able to say, this is the Son of God. And I believe his whole point in making that is that when we walk alongside certain individuals, maybe we don't agree with, we don't necessarily understand their walk or their experience, being able to see, hear, and empathize with their journey, with their call, with their plight, with their opposition, it changes something inside of you. You're in community with them at that point in time, and you're able to at least start to wrestle and reckon with some of the theologies that you've been taught that have been incorrect, some of which might have even been incomplete. And so I think it's very, very important to be in conversation with women who are in ministry, to be able to hear us out. And something else I will say, and these are not my words, Reverend Maria Crumpton, who I believe is in Philadelphia or in the New Jersey area, she said something at a conference last year that stuck with me. And she talked about how one of the biggest things when it comes to men being allies of women in ministry, be mindful of what it is that you say behind closed doors, because you can support us in public and you can derail and undermine and undo all of the work that you've done publicly by making a sexist and patriarchal statement behind closed doors. So be mindful of the conversations you have behind closed doors. I have been a witness to this. I have had brothers who literally will text me like, I'm in support of you, I'm this, is that, and the other, and then will send a DM not recognizing that I'm a part of that church's Facebook group, and I get all of the messages saying, hey, I don't think I support this, but you just told me A, B, C, and D. So it's very important that what you're saying publicly and what you're saying behind closed doors align. If you don't agree with me behind closed doors, don't sit there and say that you agree with me publicly. If your stance when you walk into a church is going to be something that is antithetical to the way in which I am walking and ministering, but you're telling me something different, that's not okay with me. So it's very important to be mindful of just the conversations that you have behind closed doors when you're having locker room talk, because that's just as important as what you're saying in the public eye.
And as the comedian Spice Adams would say, now that's a for sure right on. Because I know for a fact that what you said about the conversations, the private versus the public conversations, there have been people that have told me stuff that have said one thing publicly and then another thing privately, and if they would do that to me as a man, I know for sure that it definitely happens to you all as women. And also, you said something earlier about getting those books from those scholars and reading the works and everything, and wrestling with the things that they've said. I know you're telling the truth on that right there. Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas's Sexuality in the Black Church, that was one that really, really, really challenged me. It's crazy because I know I read it somewhere in that book because it sat with me for the longest. Unless I'm making this up, I do believe that I read that she said, until you learn to love all Black people, you don't love any Black people.
You are not making it up. She said it. Yes.
And oh man, that hit me in a different way.
Yeah.
Because I had to really wrestle with my thought process on things that I've said about the queer community, and knowing good and well that some of my good friends growing up, neighbors, classmates, are part of the queer community, and having to wrestle with, Robert, you wrong.
Yeah.
You have done them a disservice, because you say you love them, but do you really love them?
Mm.
And learning to love all Black people,
Yeah.
no matter what their gender or sexuality is, and that has really stuck with me for years.
Yeah.
Um, and I always recommend that book,
Me too.
to people in leadership. It's like, hey, you need to read this. And for me, it's not just for, the Black churches, for all churches. You need to read this.
Yeah.
You need to wrestle with what she's written, wrestle with her research. She Because of her research and listening to her, I got introduced to, correct me if I'm wrong, is it Dr. Pamela Lightsey? Is that how
Yes.
you pronounce her
I
name?
believe it's Lightly, but yes.
Lightsley. Okay. Yeah, I got introduced to her works, and there was a panel, I think, that they were on, and they were dealing with these tough subjects, and I got introduced. One scholar will introduce you to another scholar, and it's like,
Yes.
man. And I have to give a shameless plug here to my mentor, Dr. Raymond Carr. Because of him, he introduced me to Dr. Angela Sims. And I mean, if you don't know Dr. Angela Sims, who's the president of Crozier Rochester Divinity School, if you don't know her, man, get to know her, because she has been a blessing to my family. She's been a person of her stature, being the president of a school, um, taking time out to encourage me.
Mm.
I'm like, man, that means a lot. When
Yeah.
you have someone of her stature who, just, would just sit down and have a everyday conversation. And every time I talk to her, it's, hey, Robert, how's your family? I'm like, man, that means a lot. So, I mean, I've been introduced to some great women in ministry, and I applaud you, sister. I applaud Sister Brittany, for, knowing a little bit about, um, your beginnings, and how you have allowed God to help you navigate through how you grew up, and now, both of you all are Ivy League scholars, man. I mean, that's that, man. I'm just proud. I am just proud to be able, to know, um, women who have been able to navigate that. My wife has shown me a lot over the years, and she has been the one, behind the scenes, that has helped me to get to the point that I'm at. And sometimes when I talk to her, she's like, "Babe, I don't agree with you on that, but but if that's what you think, if that's what you think, okay." But we're gonna agree to disagree on that one right there. So yeah, but yeah, I look, I just appreciate all of y'all, from my mother, Sunday school teacher, my wife, my daughter, my oldest daughter that I told you about earlier, where I said she better sit down somewhere. That child she has preached several sermons to me over the years, in just being my daughter, and so, it's been awesome. Sister
We
Deja, I almost called you Dr. Deja. Do you have any final? Any final words?
I appreciate you and just being an ally, but also just being a brother who uses your platform to be able to give a voice to women like myself. I think that's also something that our Black men can do to be able to help us. The reality is majority of our congregations are spearheaded by men. And so in order for women's voices to be able to be heard at tables, we need men who have platforms like this, who are willing to stand in pulpits and fight for us. And so I appreciate your willingness to fight for us, your willingness to acknowledge your past, and we all have one, and just the ways and areas in which you've gotten it wrong, but you're striving to continue to be better day by day. And so I appreciate you and just getting to know you, but I appreciate you so much. And I believe that there are plenty of brothers who should follow in your footsteps and do the same. So thank you for extending a platform for my voice to be heard today.
You're very welcome, my sister. The way I look at it is this right here. I spend a lot of time doing harm. So now that God has given me a platform, it's only right for me to go as hard as I did when I was preaching in
Come on,
those
Paul.
pulpits and everything.
Come on,
So
Paul.
I gotta go hard, and I've been alienated, but that's fine
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, I'll never forget. I had an opportunity to interview for a congregation one time, and apparently there was something that I said in one of the sermons in the interview, and someone took issue with it and asked if I could send more material. So I sent more material. And I finally just told the sister that was helping me out along the process and everything. I said, sister, at the end of the day, I know I, that I share some responsibility for working with the elders and everything. I said, but at the end of the day, I work for God. And if my preaching and my teaching makes people uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but not sorry, because now that I know what I know, I got to share it with the people of God. And it may make some people upset. I've been in some tense conversations before with church leadership, but I stood my ground, and it's like it's only right for me to do the right thing, even if it alienates me. I mean, I've had money cut off, for standing up, but that's fine too. But it's about doing the right thing. We were talking about the women in ministry earlier. My Christian ethics professor, she helped me to see some things that I never even considered before. She was not a sister, but the perspective that she gave me, from a woman's standpoint. My theology professor, a feminist, and she gave me a perspective that I had never considered before. So I know the importance now of women being in ministry, women being in the academy. I never forget. This is my last thing, I promise. A preacher told me one time that I needed to be careful about going to seminary because he heard that they had women teachers. And my very first professor in seminary was a woman. And she was the one that told me, Robert, grace goes both ways. Grace goes both ways. So just like you want it, you got to give it.
Yes.
And so that's what I have to remember. I read some crazy things that some of my brothers say across the board. It's not just from the faith tradition that we grew up in. It's just across the board. And it's like, seriously, it's like, where did you get that from? But Sister Deja, I appreciate you spending some time with us. This is it for tonight. And hopefully this is not the last time we hear from you. Thank you again for spending some time with us. And as soon as we get everything uploaded, we'll be putting this out for the masses.
Come on,
This
Bob.
will definitely not be your last time being put out in the interwebs. Thank you again, sister.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.